Hello, Summoners! My name is Sam, this is Vision Denial, and this week, main stage has started. We lose two more teams, and half of them have now been eliminated. Is Europe on a downward spiral? Is lane swapping just much better than what it was in 2014? And are we expecting another Chinese almost sweep? And more in this week's episode of Road to MSI. Let's begin. Well. Half the teams are gone. Half of the teams have great prospects, for the most part. It's going to be an interesting time in the second part of the main stage. And quite honestly, this should be an excitement for everybody. But before we go through all of that, let's take a look at all of the best of fives that we've seen so far from the main stage, about 8 of them. Now, if you're new here, I do a review of these as I get to watch them because I have not been able to really keep up with them live. So if ever you want to get a look at that, I have my TikTok down below that you can take a look and see them as I post them. But otherwise, you can also watch them here. Let's see the first and part of the second round of the main stage. Quite frankly, any other prediction would be a fool's tale. Team Liquid tried their damnedest from solid vision, good draft adaptation, clever workarounds, and a solid understanding of their win conditions. But they are always too slow, and it seems that the relentless Team Liquid from the playoffs at LCS aren't here to play at MSI, making them decent at the early game but completely lost in the mid to late game stages. Top Esports, for their part, are not messing around, not spending any time skirmishing without a purpose, and really focusing super well on their win conditions, controlling around neutral objectives, and really flexing their individual micro skills and the overall macro, as all trades were positive trades for Top Esports. Hard to tell how things will be moving forward here for Top Esports, with such a strong showing that not much can be critiqued on a surface level. You'd really have to scratch at some nitpicks. My MVP for this series is Jacula, who flexed especially hard. So many bans had to be thrown at him. This was the first round of the MSI main stage at the upper bracket. Team Liquid Honda from the LCS versus Top Esports of the LPL. Quite honestly, one of the weirder series I've seen out of Gen G. Now, Fnatic show us their skirmishing strengths and ability to keep up with macro plays and strong adaptability, putting Gen G into some very strange and awkward situations. Now, the problems arise when they find themselves incapable of pushing pressure, taking turrets, or even making their vision consistently deep whenever a skirmish is won. Something that Gen G was more than happy to do. Now, Gen G's vision coordination and overall macro approach put a damper on Fnatic's answers, as each play they opted for traded even or ahead, usually as Fnatic garnered absolutely nothing. Now, Gen G playing at this scrappy of a level is concerning on the silly approach and mistakes that they that on paper would honestly be concerning, but given their history with international matchups. That said, I'm optimistic, seeing that they are ready to play whatever style is thrown at them. My MVP for this series is Keen, who was always a problem for Fnatic that they could not nullify for some reason. This was round 1 of MSI, upper brackets, main stage. Fnatic of the LEC versus Gen G of the LCK. Kudos to the Talons for calling out BLG's nonsense. They held incredible vision, strong early game approaches, and lane swap macro play that, honestly, it was great coordination, understood their win conditions, all while properly punishing some of the wilder choices out of BDBD gaming. The caveat is that most of the Talons' victories are poor choices from BDBD, as none of the leads that the Talons found ballooned significantly with gold. Map pressure maybe, but not gold. Still, strong closes out of these games. Now that said, Bitty played foolishly for so many games, thinking that they were that much better than the Talons. The losses they had and how they lost, more specifically, should give them the wake-up call necessary. Because Game 5 BDBD, the one with crazy vision, gnarly coordination, non-stop pressure with no quarrels to find every morsel to steal from you, to balloon their leads and close out games, yeah, that's what we expected out of this series. And maybe they realize there's no easy opponent, and that they should remind everyone why they are considered the favorites at every turn. My MVP of the series is Elk for the consistency he had this series. This was round 1 on the upper bracket of MSI's main stage. PSG, Paris Saint-Germain Talons, esports from the PCS versus Bitty Bitty Gaming of the LPL. Quite honestly, a lot closer than expected. But if any team was going to do it, it had to be G2, who brought us excellent coordination, fantastic vision play, some very strong macro approaches, and frankly, stronger early game in this series. But between their overzealousness, awkward approach in the mid-game and around neutral objectives, and inconsistent individual plays made this series a lot harder for G2 to find victories. T1, for their part, holds similar strengths and weaknesses, but ultimately fell to some bizarre draft choices that put them on the back foot by default. And it says a lot when you can win this series with strange drafts like this that we would hope could be corrected soon for their upcoming series, but frankly doesn't seem like it will, and T1 will just keep struggling with harder matches and matchups going forward, no matter how scary their macro play is. My MVP for this series is Keria, who had the largest impact in these skirmishes for T1. This was the main stage at MSI, the first round at the upper bracket, G2 of the LEC versus T1 of the LCK. We say goodbye to Fnatic. I expected them to make a bit of more of a splash in round 1, and this feels a little disappointing. They show some solid coordination, creativity, but so much of the series was mired with indecision, lack of proactivity, and some poor vision play and genuinely questionable macro choices. Now, I hope to see some of this shored up for the next time they attempt an international play to qualify for, because there is a solid nugget of a team here that just needs to clean up their consistency. Team Liquid, for their part, finally show up and play like their playoff selves. Incredible vision play, solid neutral setup, great coordination. There is something bizarre to see some of their early game take a hit in terms of the consistency and have a Team Liquid really embrace the mid to late game stages, but better late than never. They will have to contend with teams who have a stronger early game and also play strong mid to late game, and it's a matter of whether or not they have the momentum to find success going forward. My MVP for the series is APA, whose influence forced Fnatic to really target his pool heavily and still struggle to minimize his impact. This was the round 1 of the main stage of MSI at the lower bracket. Fnatic of the LEC versus Team Liquid of the LCS. Top Esports took too long to wake up and be alive in this series. Now they show some incredible coordination, strong neutral approach, good adaptation, and frankly, almost pulling off a reverse sweep shows enough of their prowess and strength with regards to their peak performance. But between their inconsistency with vision, sideline pressure, and early game approach, and Gen G holding things together just enough, Top Esports was just one step too slow in this series. While Gen G are showing the cracks of their international play, they still hold some good neutral setups, incredible vision play, and decent enough coordination. Although that is also something baffling to me. How do they get that and keep splitting up during team fights that shouldn't be that disjointed? Both teams are showing me a lot of concern, for their level of macro play usually indicates a much stronger approach that should be present in this series, but instead, it was a little bit all over the place. My MVP for the series is Chovy, who despite the weird errors was still the most impactful member of his squad. This was round 2 of the main stage of MSI in the upper bracket, Top Esports of the LPL versus Gen G of the LCK. We say goodbye to Paris Saint-Germain Talons Esports, a team that surprised some but met expectations exactly for me, which is disappointing because it could have been a lot more. The warm-up curse is still persistent, even with great vision, solid approach to neutrals, and understanding of their win conditions. We find ourselves the Talons who opted into so many skirmishes that were questionable and way too late to take. had slower early games, and really didn't adapt properly from game to game. They were just lost in this series. It's a shame, given how strong of a showing they got to present, that this is the way they leave the tournament, but also not unexpected either. While G2 play some of their cleanest and what feels best prepared series I've seen them play international in a long time. A lot more patient, organized, with limited micro errors, while still showing off their macro prowess and coordination. There were moments where chaos ensues that feels purposeful, and I wonder if that's because they clocked being that much better, in which case I hope they don't see that reflected again in future series, especially with the opponents that they'll have to face. My MVP for this series is Mickey X, whose roaming presence was a major contributor to the pain in Paris Saint-Germain Talon's side. This was round 1 of the MSI main stage in the lower bracket, Paris Saint-Germain Talon's Esports from the PCS versus G2 Esports of the LEC. It seems like full bans on fakers really works as a strategy. T1 bring to the stage a very specific kind of control and pace to the game that still holds solidly in this series. Some great vision play, fantastic neutral setups, coordination on point, and all factors required for a good showing here. Now that said, their drafting and adaptability is incredibly questionable especially against a team like Bilibili. I had myself questioning what if they even were prepared enough to know how to play against Bilibili Gaming at all. Now, Bilibili, for their part, do show an incredible amount of preparation and adaptability, playing off many styles and outshining T1 in their own expertises, macro-oriented play, and back-foot skirmishing. It was clean play all around, from visions to neutrals and sieges, and this is more along the lines of what people expect and will continue to expect out of Bilibili. My MVP for this series is Knight, who shut Faker down and really applied so much pressure during this whole series. This was round 2 of the MSI main stage in the upper bracket, T1 of the LCK versus Bilibili Gaming of the LPL. With that, let's do first. Is Europe on a downward spiral? I mentioned this primarily due to the way that Fnatic lost, and it is easy to see, and especially when comparing to their main season as well as the playoffs of many of the different teams, that G2 is really the front runner and everybody else is playing like catch up and heavy catch up to be able to even compete at the level that G2 is able to do. Now, do I expect G2 to flounder or fumble in the last moments? I have my doubts that they'll make top 4, and I've mentioned this in in 2 weeks videos beforehand, how I'm very uncertain on like the consistency of their play, which makes me more concerned about the region's whole approach to the game. And I wouldn't and I've had my critiques of their format, but I wouldn't really wholesale blame the format. Formats are an easy go-to to blame regions' inability to compete internationally, but if that were the case, North America still seems to be steadily doing better without much of a change to their format at all. Granted, knock on wood, the changes in summer might do something. Honestly, it's usually a cultural regional thing that's going on, and it is hard to establish from a distance and just from the veil of watching the games play out what is happening culturally that makes the European teams seem to play not as strongly as they used to in international competitions, because this is a region that usually would have at least 2 teams, at the very minimum, able to compete, 3 on the regular, and it's become a trend where they're losing that kind of steam and aren't able to actually impact things as much. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, what you think your expectations are, but I'm of the mindset that there's been a stagnation of approach to coaching as well as misuse of the multi-tiered system of now acquiescing 4 regions in their secondary system. I think 5 regions as part of the like secondary challenger scene. That's a lot of teams and like players to muster through, and not properly being able to vet them in like a direct one-to-one competition amongst each other. You know what I mean? Like the EU Masters is one thing, but the EU Masters you can get a sense of it, and it's not continuous splits long. They're just isolated tournament. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, you let me know. Next, lane swaps have been incredibly interesting for those who may not have been around as long as some of us have. The earlier lane swaps were a speed tactic, first and foremost. You would swap lanes. It had nothing to do necessarily with matchups. It had more to do with the ability to get as much going and as much gold as possible fast and destroying turrets for pressure. You would be the one to initiate it, and you would have to predict whether or not your opponent was going to do so as well. And so you'd end up with mirror splits, so on and so forth. And the reason why many people thought it was boring, I didn't, but many reasons why people thought it was boring or felt like didn't like it, had more to do with the fact of the lack of interactability across the board, right? Top laners were stuck with either jungling with their jungler or getting just dove on or like isolated and having zero play whatsoever. We end up with something different as our top laners, many of the top laners are either laning with their mid laners, ganking them, doing some secondary roaming support options, finding ways to like on purpose die so they can stay around minions to get gold and experience faster. There is a lot more to the dynamics of the actual lane swap because you can't have the speed you used to. The team who opts into the lane swapping has to do so with the intention of doing it for levels first and foremost. It is an experience game and not or an experience game as opposed to a gold/speed and map pressure game. Because if it was a speed map pressure game, why would you do it? You would keep going and then your opponents would just take the bottom turret and you'd be done. Because the changes to the top turret is what makes this dynamic more interesting. And the fact of that we're living in a lane swap meta that is not like continuously pervasive, like it is not every game or every other game, teams are deciding whether or not it is worth the risk of experience leads, makes this a lot more fun to actually engage with. Like, it is hard to argue that this is a much better viewing experience of lane swaps than it was in 2014. I dare you to go watch those games. Those games are hard to watch in a lot of cases. Not to least because they're also very old. So, I think these are here to stay for a long time and probably well accepted, at least to my part. But I also am biased. I did enjoy watching the older lane swap like games because it enacted a more strong macro thought to the game while playing it, as opposed to just autopilot, which was what the standard matchups were for a long time, which is, I don't know, unfortunate to anybody else, but to me it's boring. For everybody else, if you're alright, you want to see the same lane over and over again. Not condescending. I'm saying to me it's more interesting for lane swap than just standard lanes a lot of the time. I want to hear what you think. Do you think that this iteration of lane swap is more interesting? I want to hear more dynamics as to, or more opinions of this new era of lane swap. Next, we have currently, if you remember last year, the whole spiel of the year was that JD Gaming was going to do the Golden Road. When spring, summer, MSI, wow. Yeah. Spring, MSI, summer, and then Worlds. And they got 3 out of 4. And quite honestly, no, I don't think a region has had control of of both international tournaments, let alone the ability to have a singular team control the entire way through. It's not happened. I mention this because watching BD Gaming play gives me an indication that they are not slowing down. They are the most likely team, to me, they're the most likely team to win the entire tournament still. Gen G is still out in the open, and whether or not their international consistencies will go away or if they're going to be able to actually lock it down for the first time. But for the moment, BD seems to be just in line. They know what they're going to get done, and they're not like stopping anytime soon. And from their lack of competition, honestly, in the LPL, it would not surprise me to see BD attempt the Golden Road. I know it's a little early to say that. The tournament is not done yet. But it is worth thinking about, because the other team that could pull it off is Gen G. And there's inklings of hope that maybe their international struggles are going away. And to note, there's only been like 3 teams to win multiple world championships. T1 is the obvious. You got D Plus Gaming, like D Plus Kia, who Gamwon has won 2 world championships, and Gen G, who previously under the Samsung banner has won 2 world championships. It is not out of the question to see Gen G possibly make a comeback in terms of international play and also do the Golden Road, because they equally have had very little competition in their region, and they've been the most winning team so far in the region, having won, I believe now, 4 back-to-back splits. So they've also won their spring, and they're in contention to win the MSI and likely summer if things go correctly. Am I the only one that's seeing like writing on the wall that we got 2 teams with potentials for this, and should be like moderately excited for? Maybe? Those are my thoughts, or my observations, at least from what we've seen so far. But otherwise, I would like to hear your thoughts down below about if you think BD is going to be able to make it, or like which teams are the most likely so far, as what you've seen, to make it to the finals, either via comeback or just straight up going to the moon and possibly winning everything else. This is a fairly short video this week, mostly because I wanted to get some of the thoughts out of my mind in regards to some of my concerns and also hopes with the tournament. It's been interesting. I don't like the format of this tournament. Not to say the least of it is also not helped that we don't have as many smaller regions. There's less actual international, there's less interregional competition as it is. They've done a lot to avoid you're not going to get 2 LPL teams facing off against each other until the finals of a bracket, the upper finals or lower finals, and I think that's literally the only case at this point. So to me, it has become less fun to watch MSI, just in general. And I think part of it is a consequence of the format change. While the double elimination bracket of the main stage is fun, and it's successful in what it's attempting, it becomes less exciting to see a bunch of regions play 2 regions, and that's it. And then you're done. That's not a lot of international matchups. That's just scraps. At least beforehand they got 3. And we had a format where they could get 6. That was interesting. I'm really hoping that there's changes going forward in terms of of at least developing more regions for play and not losing more. I'm not holding my breath out for that. And that the format itself allows for a lot more flexibility. If we're going to do the play-in stage, don't do... I'd rather they do a bunch of best of 1s amongst each other than just, best of 3s, but you play against such a small pool of people. Those are my thoughts so far. But the tournament has been fun. It's been interesting. The new meta is great. I'm just a little saddened by the fact that we could have had more. But that's what I have for today. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. I appreciate everybody who watches. It means so much to me. Next time we talk next week, it will be MSI is over and looking to the future for summer and potentially Worlds. Thank you all for watching. Have a good one.